Marcus Johnson wheeled his chair across the uneven pavement of the gas station parking lot, the familiar weight of his prosthetic leg making each push of the wheels feel heavier than it should. The afternoon sun beat down on his shoulders as he made his way toward the convenience store entrance. 3 years had passed since the IED explosion in Afghanistan took his left leg below the knee, but some days the phantom pain still reminded him of everything he had lost. The small town of Cedar Falls wasn't supposed to be like this. When Marcus moved here 6 months ago, the real estate agent had promised him peace and quiet, a place where a veteran could heal, she had said. The disability payments weren't much, but they stretched further into town where rent was cheap and people supposedly looked out for each other. Marcus had believed her. He needed to believe her. The automatic doors of the Gas and Go slid open with a tired wheeze. Behind the counter, Sarah Martinez looked up from her textbook and smiled. She was studying for her nursing degree at the community college, working nights to pay for school. Over the past few months, she had become one of the few people in town who treated Marcus like a normal person instead of a charity case. "Afternoon, Marcus," Sarah called out. "The usual? Just a coffee and maybe some of those donuts if they're fresh," Marcus replied, maneuvering his wheelchair between the narrow aisles. The store was cramped, clearly not designed with accessibility in mind, but he had learned to make do. As he reached for a cup, the rumble of motorcycle engines filled the air outside. The sound grew louder, more aggressive, until it seemed to shake the windows of the small store. Marcus glanced outside and counted at least a dozen motorcycles pulling into the parking lot. The riders wore leather vests with patches he didn't recognize, but their attitude was unmistakable even from a distance. Sarah's smile faded as she watched through the window. "Great," she muttered under her breath. "The Iron Wolves are back." Marcus had heard about the Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club. They weren't technically a criminal organization, at least not one that law enforcement could prove anything against. But they had a reputation for causing trouble, especially for people they considered weak or different. The local police seemed reluctant to deal with them, always finding reasons why their complaints couldn't be properly investigated. The first biker through the door was a massive man with arms covered in tattoos and a beard that hung down to his chest. His vest identified him as Tank, and the way the others deferred to him made it clear he was their leader. Behind him came 5 more bikers, each one looking like they had stepped out of a movie about dangerous criminals. Well, Tank said loudly, his voice carrying across the small store. "Looks like we got ourselves some interesting company today." Marcus tried to ignore them, focusing on filling his coffee cup. But he could feel their eyes on him, could sense the shift in the atmosphere. Sarah had gone completely silent behind the counter, her textbook forgotten. "Hey there, Wheels," Tank called out, and Marcus felt his stomach drop. "I'm talking to you, soldier boy." Marcus turned his wheelchair around slowly, keeping his expression neutral. Years of military training had taught him how to read dangerous situations, and everything about this felt wrong. But running wasn't an option, not in a wheelchair, not with these men blocking the only exit. "Can I help you with something?" Marcus asked calmly. Tank laughed, a harsh sound that made Sarah flinch. "Help me? That's rich. Tell me something, hero. What exactly did you do over there in the sandbox that was so important you had to come back here all broken and useless?" The other bikers spread out through the store, not quite surrounding Marcus, but making it clear that he had nowhere to go. Marcus recognized the tactic. They wanted him to feel trapped, to panic, to give them an excuse to escalate things. "I serve my country," Marcus replied simply. "Same as a lot of other people." "Serve your country," one of the other bikers repeated mockingly. "Look how well that worked out for you. Can't even walk like a real man anymore." Marcus felt the familiar burn of anger in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "I can handle myself just fine." Tank stepped closer, close enough that Marcus could smell the alcohol on his breath, despite it being early afternoon. "Handle yourself? You can't even handle getting around without that chair. What good are you to anybody now? Just another burden on the taxpayers, right?" Behind the counter, Sarah reached for her phone. Marcus caught her eye and shook his head slightly. He knew that calling the police would only make things worse. The Iron Wolves had connections in this town, and the officers who might respond were just as likely to side with the bikers as help him. "I pay my taxes same as everyone else," Marcus said. "With what? Disability checks." Tank's voice grew louder. "My tax dollars going to support some broken soldier who couldn't even do his job right. You should have stayed over there, Wheels. At least then, you wouldn't be taking up space here." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. Not because they were true, but because he had heard variations of them in his own head during the darkest moments of his recovery. The nights when the phantom pain kept him awake, when he wondered if he really was just a burden on everyone around him. But Marcus had also learned something important during his recovery. The opinions of small-minded bullies didn't define his worth. He was a United States Marine, and no amount of harassment was going to change that. "I think we're done here," Marcus said, starting to move his wheelchair toward the door. Tank stepped directly into his path. "We're done when I say we're done, soldier boy. You think you could just roll in here, take up space, and then leave when you feel like it? This is our town, our gas station, and we don't like your kind around here." "My kind?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious about the answer. "Broken, useless, taking handouts while real men work for a living." Tang gestured to his fellow bikers. "We built this community. We support local businesses. We don't sit around collecting checks for getting hurt on the job." Marcus almost laughed at that. Most of these men probably hadn't worked a legitimate job in years, but he kept that observation to himself. Instead, he tried once more to move around Tank toward the door. Tank grabbed the handles of Marcus's wheelchair, stopping him cold. "I said we're not done." The moment Tank's hands touched his wheelchair, Marcus felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was assault. And despite what Tank and his friends might think, Marcus was far from defenseless. "Take your hands off my chair," Marcus said quietly, but there was steel in his voice that hadn't been there before. Tank leaned down, putting his face close to Marcus's. "Or what, Wheels? What exactly are you going to do about it?" Marcus looked Tank directly in the eyes, and for the first time, the biker seemed to recognize something dangerous looking back at him. But Tank had gone too far to back down now, especially in front of his crew. "Sarah," Marcus called out without looking away from Tank. "What time do you get off work tonight?" "Marcus, don't," Sarah started to say. "Just tell me what time," Marcus interrupted. 8 o'clock, she answered nervously. Marcus nodded. "These gentlemen are going to be long gone by then. Aren't you, Tank?" Tank's grip tightened on the wheelchair handles. "Is that some kind of threat, soldier boy?" "It's a promise," Marcus replied simply. The gas station fell completely silent except for the hum of the refrigeration units. Tank stared down at Marcus, clearly trying to decide how far he wanted to push this. His fellow bikers watched nervously, suddenly, less certain about their leader's brilliant plan to intimidate the disabled veteran. Finally, Tank released the wheelchair handles and stepped back. But Marcus could see in his eyes that this wasn't over. "You're right about one thing, Wheels," Tank said with a nasty smile. "We will be gone by 8 o'clock. But so will you. Permanently." Tank turned and walked toward the door, his crew following behind him. At the threshold, he looked back one more time. "See you around, Marcus Johnson." The fact that Tank knew his full name sent a chill down Marcus's spine. This hadn't been a random encounter. They had been watching him, learning about him, planning this confrontation. As the motorcycles roared to life outside, Sarah rushed around the counter to check on Marcus. "Are you okay? Should I call the police?" Marcus shook his head. "The police can't help with this. But I need to ask you a favor." "Anything," Sarah said immediately. "Do you have a way to get in touch with a Marine Corps recruiting station in the next county?" Sarah looked confused. "I think so." "What?" Marcus watched through the window as the Iron Wolves disappeared down the highway, their engines fading into the distance. "Because I'm about to call in some reinforcements." Staff Sergeant Jennifer Rodriguez was finishing paperwork at the Marine Corps recruiting station when her phone rang. The caller ID showed a local area code, but she didn't recognize the number. After 12 years in the Corps, she had developed an instinct about important calls versus sales pitches. Something about the timing felt urgent. "Marine Corps recruiting, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez speaking." "Sergeant, my name is Marcus Johnson. I'm a disabled Marine veteran living in Cedar Falls, and I need help. Rodriguez sat up straighter in her chair. Marines never left another Marine behind, and the desperation in Marcus's voice triggered every protective instinct she had developed over the years. What's the situation, Marine? Marcus explained the encounter at the gas station, the threats from Tank and the Iron Wolves, and his growing certainty that they intended to follow through on their promises. Rodriguez listened without interrupting, taking notes, and feeling her anger build with each detail. How many of them? She asked when Marcus finished. At least a dozen, maybe more. They knew my name, Sergeant. They've been watching me. Rodriguez had dealt with situations like this before. Small-town bullies who thought they could intimidate veterans, especially disabled ones, usually back down when confronted by active-duty Marines. But the Iron Wolves sounded more organized than the typical wannabe tough guys. Give me your address, Marine, and stay put until you hear from me. After hanging up, Rodriguez stared at her computer screen for a long moment. Then she opened her contacts list and started making calls. The first call went to Gunnery Sergeant Michael Chun at Camp Pendleton. Chun had served with Rodriguez in Iraq and owed her a favor from a situation involving a bar fight and some very understanding military police. More importantly, he was currently on leave visiting his family just 2 hours away from Cedar Falls. Gunny, it's Rodriguez. I need a favor. What kind of favor? Chun asked, immediately alert. Rodriguez never called unless something serious was happening. The kind that involves showing some local bullies what happens when they mess with Marines. Chun was quiet for a moment. How many Marines are we talking about? As many as we can get. This isn't some college kids acting tough, Gunny. These are organized criminals threatening a disabled veteran. Send me the details. I'll make some calls. Rodriguez's second call went to Sergeant Major William Thompson, who ran the Veterans Affairs office in the county seat. Thompson was a Vietnam veteran who had made it his personal mission to ensure that no veteran in his jurisdiction felt abandoned or unprotected. Thompson here. Sergeant Major, it's Staff Sergeant Rodriguez from recruiting. I've got a situation involving a disabled Marine being harassed by a motorcycle gang in Cedar Falls. Thompson's voice hardened immediately. Tell me everything. Rodriguez repeated Marcus's story, and she could practically hear Thompson's blood pressure rising with each detail. The Iron Wolves, Thompson said when she finished. I know about them. Local law enforcement has been trying to build a case for months, but they're careful. Never do anything that can be definitively proven. Well, they just threatened a United States Marine in front of a witness. How definitive do we need? Good point. What do you need from me? Marines, Sergeant Major. As many as you can find. And make sure they understand this isn't about starting a fight. It's about finishing one that somebody else started. Thompson chuckled grimly. Rodriguez, by the time I'm done making calls, Cedar Falls is going to look like a Marine Corps reunion. The third call was the most important one. Rodriguez dialed a number she rarely used, belonging to a man she had served under in Afghanistan. Colonel James Morrison was now stationed at Quantico, but he had grown up in small-town America and understood exactly how situations like this could spiral out of control. Colonel Morrison's office, Lieutenant Wilson speaking. This is Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. I need to speak with the colonel immediately. It's about a Marine in distress. Morrison came on the line within 30 seconds. Rodriguez, what's the situation? Rodriguez explained everything for the third time, but with Morrison, she included her assessment of the threat level and her recommended response. Morrison listened carefully, asking pointed questions about local law enforcement capabilities and the likelihood of civilian casualties. How confident are you that this can be resolved without escalating into something that brings unwanted attention to the Corps? Morrison asked. Very confident, sir. We're not talking about combat operations here. We're talking about a show of force that demonstrates what happens when civilians threaten Marines. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Rodriguez, I'm going to give you something I've never given a staff sergeant before. I'm giving you carte blanche to resolve this situation as you see fit. But I want a full report within 24 hours and I want absolute assurance that no Marine under your command does anything that could be construed as excessive force. Understood, sir. And Rodriguez? Make sure that motorcycle gang understands that the United States Marine Corps takes care of its own. All of its own. After hanging up with Morrison, Rodriguez leaned back in her chair and smiled. She had authority, she had resources, and she had a righteous cause. Now, she just needed to coordinate the response. Her phone started ringing almost immediately. She was calling back with good news. Gunny, what do you have for me? 12 Marines so far, and I'm just getting started. Word is spreading fast. Turns out a lot of us have some very strong feelings about civilian cowards who pick on disabled veterans. Excellent. What's the timeline look like? We can have people in Cedar Falls by tomorrow afternoon. But, Rodriguez, you need to know something. This isn't just active duty anymore. I got calls from retired Marines, Reserve Marines, and even some Army Rangers who heard about the situation and wanted. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. Army Rangers? Apparently one of them served with your Marcus Johnson in Afghanistan. Says he was there when Johnson lost his leg, saving 3 other soldiers from that IED. The Rangers are taking this personally. Rodriguez felt a chill run down her spine. Marcus had downplayed his service record during their phone call, but clearly there was more to the story. How many total are we talking about, Gunny? At current count? 47 confirmed, with more calling in every hour. Rodriguez, I think we might have underestimated how much people care about this kind of thing. Rodriguez's phone beeped with another incoming call. She glanced at the caller ID and saw it was Sergeant Major Thompson calling back. Gunny, I need to take this. Keep coordinating and send me regular updates. She switched to Thompson's call. Sergeant Major, please tell me you have good news. Better than good news, Staff Sergeant. I just got off the phone with the Chief of Police in Cedar Falls. Turns out he's a Navy veteran who's been trying to find a way to deal with the Iron Wolf for months. When I explained the situation, he offered full cooperation. What kind of cooperation? The kind where his officers will be conveniently busy with other duties when a large group of Marines happens to show up in his town tomorrow afternoon. Rodriguez grinned. I like this Chief of Police. Gets better. I also contacted the mayor's office. The mayor is the daughter of a Marine who died in Vietnam. She's personally guaranteeing that there will be no interference from city officials. Sergeant Major, you're making this almost too easy. There's one more thing, Rodriguez. I reached out to the local VFW post. They want to help. Apparently, Marcus Johnson has been volunteering there, helping other veterans with disability paperwork. He never mentioned his own situation, just quietly helped people navigate the bureaucracy. Rodriguez shook her head in amazement. Of course Marcus was helping other veterans. That's what Marines did. What kind of help are they offering? The VFW commander is a former Army colonel. He's mobilizing his entire membership to provide support services during what he's calling a peaceful demonstration of veteran solidarity. They'll handle logistics, communications, and anything else we need. Rodriguez looked at her watch. It was nearly 6 o'clock, which meant Marcus was probably getting nervous as 8 o'clock approached. She needed to call him with an update. Sergeant Major, I need to contact our Marine and give him a status report. But keep coordinating. I have a feeling tomorrow is going to be a very interesting day in Cedar Falls. Rodriguez, make sure that young Marine knows he's not alone. Not now, not ever. Roger that, Sergeant Major. Rodriguez dialed Marcus's number, and he answered on the first ring. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez? That's right, Marine. I've got an update for you, and it's all good news. Rodriguez spent the next 10 minutes explaining the response that was building. With each detail, she could hear the amazement and relief in Marcus's voice. All of those people are coming to help me? Marcus asked when she finished. Marine, you saved the lives of 3 soldiers in Afghanistan. You've been quietly helping veterans in your community for months without asking for anything in return. And now some cowardly bullies think they can intimidate you because you're in a wheelchair. Rodriguez's voice carried the steel of absolute conviction. Not on our watch, Marine. Not ever. What do you need me to do? Stay safe tonight. Don't go anywhere alone. And if the Iron Wolves show up, you call 911 immediately. Tomorrow afternoon, you're going to have more backup than you know what to do with. After hanging up, Rodriguez sat in her office for a few more minutes, thinking about the event she had just set in motion. Tomorrow, the Iron Wolves were going to learn something that they should have known all along. You don't mess with the United States Marines. Marcus spent the night in his small apartment, watching the parking lot through his window and jumping at every sound. The Iron Wolves hadn't returned, but he knew Tank wasn't the type to make empty threats. His phone rang several times throughout the evening, each call from a different military contact offering support and asking for details about tomorrow's gathering. By morning, Marcus felt overwhelmed by the response. What had started as a desperate call for help had turned into something much larger. According to Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's latest update, nearly 60 current and former military personnel were converging on Cedar Falls. Marcus worried that the situation might spiral out of control. At 10 o'clock, his doorbell rang. Through the peephole, Marcus saw a middle-aged man in civilian clothes standing on his doorstep. The man's posture and bearing screamed military, even without a uniform. "Can I help you?" Marcus called through the door. "Marcus Johnson? I'm Sergeant Major William Thompson, Veterans Affairs. I believe Staff Sergeant Rodriguez mentioned me." Marcus opened the door and found himself looking up at a man who radiated authority and competence. Thompson's gray hair was cut in a regulation style, and his handshake was firm but careful not to overwhelm. "Sergeant Major, I'd appreciate you coming, but I'm starting to worry that this whole thing is getting blown out of proportion." Thompson stepped inside and glanced around the modest apartment. Marcus had kept it military neat, but the modifications for wheelchair accessibility were obvious. Grab bars in doorways, lowered countertops, ramps instead of steps. "Marine, may I speak freely?" "Of course, Sergeant Major. You think this is about one incident with some small-town bullies. But it's not." Thompson settled into the chair across from Marcus's wheelchair. "This is about every veteran who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong in the country they served. This is about every disabled service member who's been told they're a burden. And this is about making sure that no veteran ever feels as alone as you felt yesterday." Marcus absorbed those words quietly. He hadn't thought about the broader implications of what had happened. But, "Sergeant Major, what if things get out of hand? What if someone gets hurt?" Thompson smiled grimly. "Son, the people coming here today are professionals. They serve in Iraq, Afghanistan, and conflicts you've probably never heard of. They know the difference between a show of force and unnecessary violence. Trust them." Marcus's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but Thompson nodded encouragingly. "Marcus? This is Chief of Police David Patterson. I understand you've had some trouble with the Iron Wolves." Marcus glanced at Thompson, who gave him a thumbs up. "Yes, sir. They threatened me yesterday at the gas station." "Well, I want you to know that my department takes threats against veterans very seriously. We've been building a case against the Iron Wolves for months, and your witness testimony might be exactly what we need." "I appreciate that, Chief, but I'm not sure how much help I can be." Patterson chuckled. "Son, you've got about 50 Marines coming to town today to back you up. I think you're going to be just fine. But I want to coordinate with whoever's organizing this gathering to make sure everything stays peaceful." Thompson held out his hand for the phone. "Chief Patterson, this is Sergeant Major Thompson. I'm coordinating today's activities." Marcus listened as Thompson and the police chief worked out details for the afternoon. It was clear that Patterson was more than willing to let the military handle the Iron Wolves, as long as no laws were broken. After Thompson hung up, Marcus's phone rang again. This time it was Sarah from the gas station. "Marcus, are you okay? I've been worried sick since yesterday." "I'm fine, Sarah. Actually, I've got some help coming today." "Help? What kind of help?" Marcus looked at Thompson, who nodded. "Some of my former military colleagues are going to have a conversation with Tank and his friends." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Marcus, Tank, and his crew showed up here this morning. They were asking questions about you. Where you live, what time you usually come in, that sort of thing." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing. I told them I barely knew you." "But, Marcus, they seemed really angry. Angrier than yesterday. One of them said something about teaching you a lesson about respect." Thompson held out his hand for the phone again. When Marcus passed it over, Thompson's voice became crisp and professional. "Miss, this is Sergeant Major Thompson with Veterans Affairs. I need you to write down everything those men said this morning. Every word you can remember. Can you do that for me?" "Yes, sir. But who are you? How do you know Marcus?" "Marines take care of Marines, miss. Always." By noon, Marcus's apartment had become an unofficial command center. Thompson had been joined by Gunnery Sergeant Chun, who had driven in from his family visit with 3 other Marines. They spent the morning reviewing satellite photos of the town, identifying potential trouble spots, and coordinating with the various groups of military personnel who were arriving throughout the day. Marcus was amazed by the level of organization. These men and women weren't just showing up to intimidate some bikers. They were treating this like a military operation, with contingency plans, communication protocols, and clearly defined objectives. "Marcus," Chin said, looking up from his laptop, "I've been researching the Iron Wolves. They're not just local troublemakers. They got connections to drug trafficking, illegal weapon sales, and organized crime. Local law enforcement has been trying to build a federal case for 2 years. Does that change anything?" Marcus asked. Thompson shook his head. "It confirms that we're dealing with real criminals, not just bullies, which means we need to be even more careful about how we handle this." At 1 o'clock, Marcus's phone rang with a call from Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. "Marcus, I'm about 5 minutes out. Are you ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be, Sergeant." "Good. We're going to start with a peaceful gathering at the VFW Hall. The local post commander has arranged for food and drinks. We'll use that time to brief everyone on the situation and make sure everyone understands the rules of engagement." "Rules of engagement?" "Marine, we're not vigilantes. We're going to handle this the right way. Legal, professional, and effective." Rodriguez arrived exactly when she said she would, followed by a convoy of vehicles carrying Marines, soldiers, sailors, and even a few Air Force personnel. Marcus watched from his window as the parking lot filled with men and women who had traveled hundreds of miles to stand with him. When Rodriguez knocked on his door, Marcus opened it to find her standing with a young man in Army dress uniform. "Marcus Johnson?" the soldier asked. "Yes. I'm Sergeant First Class David Williams. I was with you in Afghanistan when you lost your leg. I wanted to thank you personally for what you did that day." Marcus stared at the soldier, memories flooding back. The convoy, the hidden IED, the moment when he saw 3 soldiers trapped under their overturned Humvee with fuel leaking everywhere. "You don't need to thank me for anything," Marcus said quietly. "The hell I don't," Williams replied. "You pulled us out of that wreck despite your own injuries. You saved 3 lives that day. And now some coward bikers think they can disrespect you? Not happening." Rodriguez checked her watch. "Gentlemen, it's time to move to the VFW Hall. Marcus, you're riding with me." As they drove through town, Marcus saw people lining the streets. Veterans, their families, and other community members had come out to show their support. Some held American flags. Others carried signs with messages like "We support our veterans" and "Thank you for your service." "How did all these people know?" Marcus asked. "Social media, phone calls, word of mouth," Rodriguez replied. "Turns out your story touched a lot of people. The local news station wants to interview you after this is over." The VFW Hall was packed with people in military dress uniforms, civilian clothes, and everything in between. Marcus recognized the structured chaos of a military briefing as Thompson took charge of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here today to support Marine Marcus Johnson and to send a clear message to anyone who thinks they can intimidate American veterans. But we're going to do this the right way." Thompson outlined the plan. The group would proceed to the gas station where the initial confrontation had occurred. They would establish a peaceful presence and wait for the Iron Wolves to respond. If the bikers chose to escalate, they would find themselves vastly outnumbered by trained military personnel. "Remember," Thompson concluded, "we're not here to start a fight. We're here to finish one. And we're going to finish it in a way that honors the uniform we've worn and the country we've served." As the group prepared to move out, Marcus felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see an older man with Vietnam veteran patches on his jacket. "Son, I was about your age when I came back from Southeast Asia. Didn't get the welcome home I expected. But today we're going to make sure every veteran knows they're valued and protected." Marcus nodded, too emotional to speak. For the first time since the confrontation with Tank, he felt genuinely confident that everything was going to be okay. Outside the VFW hall, dozens of vehicles lined up in formation. Marcus rode in Rodriguez's truck, watching as the convoy headed toward downtown Cedar Falls. Behind them, the American flag flew from multiple vehicles, and ahead of them, the future looked brighter than it had in months. The convoy of military vehicles arrived at the Gas and Go at exactly 2:30 p.m. Word had spread through town about the gathering, and curious residents lined the sidewalks to watch as nearly 60 current and former military personnel filed out of cars, trucks, and motorcycles. The atmosphere was disciplined, but electric like the moment before a perfectly executed military operation. Marcus wheeled himself from Rodriguez's truck toward the gas station entrance, flanked by Thompson and Chun. Behind them, the assembled veterans formed neat ranks in the parking lot. They're bearing unmistakably military despite the mix of uniforms and civilian clothes. Sarah Martinez stood behind the gas station counter, her eyes wide as she watched the scene unfold. When Marcus entered the store, she rushed around to greet him. "Marcus, I can't believe all these people came for you." "Neither can I," Marcus admitted. "Sarah, I want you to meet Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. She's the one who organized this." Rodriguez shook Sarah's hand firmly. "Miss Martinez, we understand you witnessed yesterday's incident. Would you be willing to give a statement to our people?" "Of course. Anything to help Marcus." Outside, the sound of motorcycle engines began to echo through the streets. The Iron Wolves were responding to reports of the military gathering, just as Thompson had predicted they would. Through the store windows, Marcus watched as a dozen motorcycles roared into the parking lot, their riders clearly agitated by the unexpected sight of organized military personnel. Tank climbed off his bike and surveyed the scene with growing anger. He had expected to find Marcus alone and vulnerable, not backed up by what looked like a small army. But Tank had built his reputation on never backing down from confrontation, and his followers were watching. "What the hell is this?" Tank shouted, striding toward the gas station entrance. Thompson stepped forward to intercept him, his bearing radiating the authority of 30 years in the military. "Sir, this is a peaceful gathering of veterans showing support for one of our own." Tank looked Thompson up and down with obvious contempt. "I don't know who you think you are, but this is none of your business, old man." "Actually," Thompson replied calmly, "threatening United States Marines is exactly my business. I'm Sergeant Major Thompson, and I think you and I need to have a conversation." Behind Tank, the other Iron Wolves dismounted from their motorcycles and moved closer. But they quickly realized that they were outnumbered by more than 4-1, and these weren't college students or weekend bikers. These were combat veterans who carried themselves like people who had faced real danger and survived. Rodriguez appeared beside Thompson, her hand resting casually on her service weapon. "Gentlemen, I'm Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, United States Marine Corps. I believe you had some things you wanted to say to Marine Johnson yesterday. Perhaps you'd like to repeat them now." Tank's face flushed red with rage and embarrassment. He had built his entire reputation on intimidating people who couldn't fight back effectively. Being confronted by trained military personnel in front of his crew was the worst possible scenario. "This is harassment," Tank snarled. "You can't just roll into town with your little army and threaten law-abiding citizens." Chun stepped forward from the ranks of veterans. "Law-abiding? Is that what you call threatening disabled veterans and terrorizing gas station clerks?" Chief Patterson chose that moment to arrive with 2 patrol cars, their lights flashing, but sirens silent. He stepped out of his vehicle and approached the group with the confidence of someone who had planned for this exact scenario. "Tank Williams," Patterson called out, using the biker's real name. "I think it's time you and I had to talk about yesterday's incident." Tank's real name sent a murmur through the assembled veterans. The man who had presented himself as some kind of outlaw leader was actually Thomas Williams, a local mechanic with a history of minor arrests and failed businesses. "I don't have anything to say to you, Patterson," Tank replied, but his voice lacked the confidence it had carried minutes earlier. "Well, I have plenty to say to you," Patterson replied. He pulled out a notebook and began reading. "Assault, harassment, threats against a disabled person, disturbing the peace. That's just from yesterday. Should I go into your outstanding warrants?" For the first time, Tank seemed to realize that the situation had shifted completely out of his control. He was no longer dealing with an isolated disabled veteran. He was facing a coordinated response from military personnel, local law enforcement, and what appeared to be half the town. Marcus wheeled himself out of the gas station, followed by Sarah and Rodriguez. When Tank saw him, the biker's face twisted with frustrated rage. "This isn't over, Johnson," Tank growled. "Actually, it is," said a new voice from behind the crowd. Everyone turned to see Colonel Morrison approaching, having driven down from Quantico in response to Rodriguez's situation reports. Morrison wore his dress blue uniform, and his presence immediately elevated the entire gathering to a different level of official military response. Tank stared at the colonel's insignia with growing alarm. Whatever he had expected when he decided to harass a disabled veteran, it definitely hadn't included attracting attention from senior Marine Corps officers. "Mr. Williams," Morrison continued, his voice carrying the absolute authority of command. "I'm Colonel Morrison, United States Marine Corps. I understand you've been threatening one of my Marines." "I ain't threatened nobody," Tank protested weakly. Morrison smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Interesting. Miss Martinez, would you please repeat for Mr. Williams what he said to Marine Johnson yesterday?" Sarah stepped forward, no longer intimidated by the bikers. With 60 military personnel backing her up, she felt confident enough to tell the truth. She recounted Tank's words exactly, including the threats and personal attacks. When she finished, Morrison nodded approvingly. "Thank you, miss. Mr. Williams, threatening a United States Marine is a federal offense. Threatening a disabled veteran is a hate crime, and doing both in front of witnesses is remarkably stupid." Chief Patterson moved closer to Tank. "Thomas Williams, you're under arrest for harassment, assault, and making terroristic threats. You have the right to remain silent." As Patterson began reading Tank his rights, the other Iron Wolves looked around nervously. They were clearly wondering whether they should try to help their leader or save themselves. The decision was made for them when other police officers arrived to take statements and collect evidence. One by one, the bikers were questioned about their involvement in yesterday's incident and their knowledge of Tank's threats. Several of them immediately began cooperating with police, eager to distance themselves from their leader's escalating behavior. Marcus watched the scene unfold with a mixture of relief and amazement. 24 hours ago, he had felt completely alone and helpless. Now he was surrounded by people who had traveled hundreds of miles to stand with him. Rodriguez approached Marcus as Tank was being loaded into a patrol car. "How are you holding up, Marine?" "Better than I have in months," Marcus replied honestly. "But Rodriguez, I have to ask, why did all these people really come? It's more than just one incident with some bikers." Rodriguez looked around at the assembled veterans, then back at Marcus. "You remember what they taught us in boot camp about the Marine Corps motto? Semper Fidelis. Always faithful. That's right. Always faithful. Not just when it's convenient, not just when it's easy, not just when the fighting is overseas." Rodriguez gestured toward the other veterans. "Always faithful means that when one Marine is threatened, we all respond. When one veteran is told they don't belong, we all stand up. When one disabled service member is made to feel worthless, we all prove them wrong." Colonel Morrison approached Marcus's wheelchair and extended his hand. "Marine, I've reviewed your service record. You showed courage under fire in Afghanistan. You've been quietly helping other veterans since your return, and you handled yesterday's situation with remarkable restraint. You exemplify everything the Marine Corps values." "Thank you, sir, but Morrison held up a hand to stop him. "Let me finish. I've spoken with the Veterans Affairs Office, and they've been looking for someone to coordinate veteran services in this region. The position comes with a salary, benefits, and the opportunity to help other veterans navigate the system. Are you interested? Marcus felt tears welling up in his eyes. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Outstanding. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez will help you with the paperwork. As the police finished their arrests and the crowd began to disperse, Marcus found himself surrounded by veterans who wanted to shake his hand, share their own stories, and make sure he knew he was part of a larger community. The feeling of isolation that had plagued him for months evaporated completely. Sarah approached him as the gathering wound down. Marcus, I've been thinking about what happened yesterday, and I want you to know something. You never showed fear, not even when they had you surrounded. That took real courage. I was terrified, Marcus admitted, but you didn't let it show. That's what courage is. As the sun began to set over Cedar Falls, Marcus realized that the day had changed more than just his immediate situation. It had reminded him of something he had lost track of during the difficult months of recovery and adjustment. He was not alone. He had never been alone. He was a United States Marine, and Marines never abandon each other. 6 months after the confrontation at the Gas and Go, Marcus Johnson sat behind his new desk at the Regional Veterans Services Center, reviewing case files for the day ahead. The office occupied a renovated building downtown, funded through a combination of federal grants and private donations that had poured in after the story of the Marine response went national. The Iron Wolves motorcycle gang had effectively disbanded after Tank's arrest led to federal investigations into their drug trafficking and weapons dealing. Tank himself was serving 18 months in federal prison, while several of his former associates had cooperated with authorities in exchange for reduced sentences. The remaining members had either left town or found legitimate employment. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. Check the news. You're famous again. Marcus pulled up the local news website on his computer and found a feature article about the Veterans Services Center's success in helping disabled veterans find employment and housing. The article mentioned that veteran unemployment in the region had dropped by 30% since the center opened, and that Marcus's innovative approach to peer counseling was being studied by other VA offices across the country. But Marcus was more interested in the quiet victories that didn't make the news. Veterans like Tommy Chun, a young Army specialist who had lost both legs in an IED attack, and was now studying engineering at the community college on a full scholarship. Or Maria Santos, a Navy corpsman struggling with PTSD who had found purpose training service dogs for other disabled veterans. Each success story reminded Marcus why the events of that day had been so important. It wasn't just about standing up to bullies or proving that Marines stick together. It was about ensuring that no veteran ever felt abandoned or forgotten. Sarah Martinez knocked on Marcus's office door. She had finished her nursing degree and now worked part-time at the Veterans Center, providing medical support and counseling referrals. Marcus, there's someone here to see you. Says he's a friend of yours from Afghanistan. Marcus wheeled around his desk, curious about which of his former unit members might be visiting. In the waiting area, he found a young man in civilian clothes, clearly nervous but determined. Corporal Johnson? I'm Private Rodriguez. Well, former Private Rodriguez. Miguel Rodriguez. I served under you in Helmand Province. Marcus studied the young man's face and felt recognition dawn. Miguel, what are you doing in Cedar Falls? I heard about what happened here, sir. About how all those Marines came to help you. And I heard about the Veterans Center you're running now. Miguel shifted comfortably. Sir, I've been having some problems since I got back. My family doesn't understand, and the VA in my hometown isn't much help. I was hoping maybe you could point me in the right direction. Marcus felt the familiar mix of pride and heartbreak that came with helping fellow veterans. Pride that they trusted him enough to ask for help, heartbreak that they needed it in the first place. Miguel, you've come to exactly the right place. Let's talk. Over the next hour, Marcus listened as Miguel described the challenges he faced. Nightmares, anxiety, difficulty holding a job, a family that meant well but couldn't relate to his experiences. It was a story Marcus had heard dozens of times, but he never stopped feeling the weight of each individual struggle. The thing is, Corporal, I kept thinking about how you always took care of your Marines over there. When things got bad, when we were scared, you made sure we knew we weren't alone. I was hoping maybe you could do that again. Marcus reached across his desk and shook Miguel's hand. Miguel, you're not alone. You're never going to be alone. That's a promise. They spent the rest of the morning setting up a comprehensive support plan for Miguel. Medical appointments for his anxiety, job training programs, temporary housing assistance, and, most importantly, connection with other veterans who had faced similar challenges. As Miguel left the office with a folder full of resources and phone numbers, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed. 6 months ago, he had felt like a burden on society, a broken soldier collecting disability payments. Today, he was helping other veterans rebuild their lives and find their place in civilian society. His computer chimed with an email from Colonel Morrison at Quantico. Marcus opened it and found an official commendation for his work at the Veterans Center, along with an invitation to speak at a conference on veteran services in Washington, D.C. Outstanding work, Marine, the email read. Your innovative programs are becoming a model for veteran services nationwide. The Corps is proud of you. Marcus printed the email and added it to a file folder labeled Good Days. It sat next to similar folders for each veteran he had helped, filled with thank you notes, job announcements, wedding invitations, and graduation photos. On difficult days, when the bureaucracy seemed insurmountable or the need felt overwhelming, he would read through these files to remind himself why the work mattered. Sarah knocked again. Marcus, Channel 7 is here for the interview about the Veterans Day ceremony. Marcus had almost forgotten. The town of Cedar Falls was hosting its first major Veterans Day ceremony in decades, organized jointly by the Veterans Center and the local VFW post. They expected over 500 attendees, including veterans from across the state. The news crew set up in the main lobby of the Veterans Center, where the walls displayed photos from the Gas-and-Go confrontation alongside pictures of veterans who had found success through the center's programs. The reporter, a young woman named Jessica Torres, had done her homework. Mr. Johnson, 6 months ago you were harassed by a motorcycle gang, and the response from military personnel made national news. Today you're running one of the most successful veteran services programs in the country. How did this transformation happen? Marcus thought carefully about his answer. I think what happened 6 months ago reminded all of us that veterans are part of a larger community. When one veteran is threatened, when one veteran struggles, we all have a responsibility to respond. This center isn't about me. It's about making sure no veteran ever feels as isolated as I felt that day. You've helped over 200 veterans find employment, housing, or a medical care since opening. What drives you to do this work? Every veteran who walks through that door served their country. They put their lives on the line for people they'll never meet. The least we can do is make sure they have the support they need when they come home. After the interview, Marcus sat in his office reviewing files for the afternoon's appointments. His phone rang, and the caller ID showed a familiar number. Sergeant Major Thompson, how are you? Outstanding, Marcus. I'm calling because I have some news I thought you want to hear. Remember Tank Williams? Hard to forget him. Well, his federal sentence is about to get extended. Turns out the Iron Wolves were more involved in drug trafficking than anyone realized. The DEA has been using his cooperation to build cases against suppliers throughout the region. Marcus felt a grim satisfaction. Tank's attempt to intimidate one disabled veteran had ultimately led to the disruption of a significant criminal network. There's something else, Thompson continued. Tank asked to speak with you. Marcus was surprised. What could he possibly want to say to me? I think he wants to apologize. The prison chaplain says he's been attending services, trying to turn his life around. Says he realizes how wrong he was about veterans and disabled people. Marcus considered the request. Part of him wanted nothing to do with Tank Williams. But another part, the part shaped by military values of honor and redemption, recognized an opportunity. Set it up, Sergeant Major. But I want you there with me. Wouldn't have it any other way, Marine. As the day wound down, Marcus locked up the Veterans Center and drove home through the streets of Cedar Falls. The town looked different to him now. Where once he had seen indifference or hostility, he now saw a community that had rallied around its veterans. Local businesses displayed veteran-friendly signs. The high school had started a program pairing students with veteran mentors, and the city council had allocated funds for wheelchair accessibility improvements throughout downtown. In his apartment that evening, Marcus video called with his parents for the first time in months. They had flown in from Oregon for the Veterans Day ceremony, and his mother couldn't stop talking about how proud she was of everything he had accomplished. "Marcus, when you first came back from Afghanistan, I was so worried," she admitted. "You seemed so lost, so angry about everything that had changed. But look at you now. You found a way to turn your struggles into strength for other people." Marcus smiled at the screen. "Mom, I had some help along the way. A lot of help." Before bed, Marcus checked his email one more time and found a message from Miguel Rodriguez. "Corporal, I wanted to thank you for today. For the first time since I got back, I feel like maybe things are going to be okay. You were right when you said, I'm not alone. Tomorrow I start my new job, and next week I'm moving into the apartment you helped me find. I'm going to pay this forward someday, sir. I promise." Marcus closed his laptop and looked around his apartment. The modifications for his wheelchair were still there. The prosthetic leg still stood beside his bed, and the phantom pain still visited him some nights. But these things no longer defined his life or limited his possibilities. He was Marcus Johnson, United States Marine, and he had found his mission. Every day, he helped other veterans discover that they were not alone, that their service mattered, and that their struggles could become sources of strength. The phone call that had started it all, reaching out to Staff Sergeant Rodriguez in desperation, had led to something neither he nor anyone else could have predicted. A single act of asking for help had created ripple effects that changed an entire community and touched hundreds of lives. As Marcus prepared for sleep, he thought about tomorrow's Veterans Day ceremony. Hundreds of veterans would gather to honor their service and celebrate their community. They would stand together, support each other, and demonstrate once again that the bonds forged in service never break. Tank Williams and the Iron Wolves had tried to make one veteran feel small, isolated, and worthless. Instead, they had discovered something that bullies throughout history have learned the hard way. When you attack one member of the military family, you face them all. And that was a fight they could never win.